for joining us on the program, Diplomatic Ties. On the program today, we shall be looking at human rights issues in Nigeria. Many of the human rights challenges in Nigeria lately are seen and emanates from either of the many sectors and areas, including abuses by Boko Haram insurgents, conduct of security agencies, intercommunal violence, public and private sector corruption, sexual orientation and gender identity, freedom of expression, media and association, key international actors, Nigeria's foreign policy. In summary, Nigeria has taken several positions in support of efforts at enthroning human rights across the globe, like support for grave crimes at the International Criminal Court (ICC) during the Africa Union Summit in Kigali, Rwanda, and a host of other issues. So, what is the state of human rights and good governance in Nigeria? That is the focus on Diplomatic Ties today, and my guest on the program is a Swedish based in Germany. He is a conflict resolution expert, David Falt. David Falt, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, sir. Nice to be here.
So that will be the focus on Diplomatic Ties today. As I say, just in a moment, we'll continue to discuss. Stay with us. You had a paper to deliver within the human rights ambit. What was the focus of the paper?
Yeah, I was invited by Global Amnesty Watch, an organization based out of the UK, who's now trying to raise the topic in awareness with regards to accusations of misconduct from armed forces and government and law enforcement agencies, in their constant struggle to fight the Boko Haram issue here in Nigeria. So my topic was, related to that and my speaking engagement.
What was the title of your paper?
It was a practitioner's view on countering violent extremism and insurgency. That's the topic.
Okay, when you say practitioner's view, how do you mean?
Well, so my job is pretty much to try and establish a dialogue as an independent mediator with insurgents group, around the areas where I cover. So where I work, and I cover Somalia, South Sudan, Yemen, Syria, Kurdistan, Iraq, etc., etc. But basically the sphere of countries that are affected by ISIS-related or splinter groups to Akim or Al Qaeda or etc., etc. I'm not an expert on Boko Haram at all. This is my first time, talking publicly about the issues here. So I want to have that as a caveat. But I know quite a lot about the dynamics around, the efforts from government agencies to try and fight these insurgents or militant or extremist groups, and that is, what I came to share my practical experience from dealing with these, criminal organizations or terrorist organizations. I would call them terrorist organizations, in my areas of work.
Well, I asked you this question. You said practitioner's view.
Yeah.
On human rights issues.
Yeah.
You're a practitioner.
Yeah.
In my own field, I'm a practitioner.
Yeah.
So everybody has his own view about human rights. So that takes me to the next question. Now, if I ask you, what really is the definition of human rights abuses?
Well, human rights abuses can be, conducted by government agencies. They can be conducted by armed, insurgents group, and human rights abuses can probably, according to some, even happen in smaller communities as well. So, the definition is difficult, to pin down. I think what is important to remember is that the government and the state actors always have a duty to uphold the civilians' right to protection, so the basic R2P argument, the right to protection, and sometimes with this asymmetric warfare that these insurgent groups are throwing our way, state actors and government agencies and anti-terrorist forces or commandos are faced with very challenging situations, and sometimes that can probably spiral out of control, and sometimes not. But I think the questions, the elephant in the room here is pretty much the allegations and the discussions that Amnesty International has brought to the table of how you're addressing your.
Do you agree with my synopsis at the opening of the program?
That there is no universal definition.
Yeah.
I think.
And where the human rights issues emanate from. Did you agree with that?
Yeah, I think. No, I agree with that. I think it's very personal.
That leads me to this. You're on diplomatic ties talking about Nigeria's relations with other parts of the world.
Yeah.
Comparing notes. Do we have a win-win relationship? Do we have a win-lose relationship? Now, comparatively, you are a conflict resolution expert. You've been to conflict areas, Somalia, name it. There and here, Nigeria, comparatively, what are your views regarding human rights abuses?
Well, as I said, I have very little experience in Nigeria, so my, where I can lend, some advices that when a government is under fire for, taking too extreme measures to counter insurgency, one also has to, in the other balance of the, remember that the government is trying to protect civilians, and that is ultimately always going to be the main priority for the government. If advocacy groups are unhappy with the way that warfare is conducted, they are right to point that out. I think, from my personal view, from the very little I know, that the arbitrary, detentions or mass detentions that have seemingly or allegedly happened in Nigeria. I haven't been, watching detention centers myself, so I can't say if it's true. But that's what we read and what we're told. Okay. That is probably not in the best interest of Nigeria for two reasons. Simply, doesn't protect civilians, and these attacks keep happening, and it doesn't deliver justice to perpetrate victims of terrorism. And when you do mass, blanket efforts or arbitration arrest, it's like if you fish too big, it's not surgical. You need to, you want to get what you want with your counter-terrorism strategy is to get bad guys out of the battlefield. Now you want to be very precise when you do that. Therefore, I'm skeptic to blanket efforts.
Okay, now. Where I'm coming from is when insurgents started in Nigeria, they gained a lot of grounds. And when the Nigerian military came up smoking under the Joint Military Task Force, civilian JTF, all that, a lot of concerns started coming up. Amnesty International accusing or alleging that there are a lot of human rights abuses in Nigeria. So did you expect that Nigeria would have folded its arms and watched insurgents took over the entire place?
Well, everything has to be put in relative terms. We see one of the largest mass murders, going on, or atrocities, or genocides, sorry, I'm losing my word, in Syria right now as we're speaking. That's happening every single minute. We don't see, we see and now and then we see a little bit of, international uproar, against what Assad is doing, or Putin is helping, aiding and abetting him to do. Here, you're in a more contained environment. You're not in a full-fledged, conflict. You live with an insurgency problem, but you also live with famine and other issues, corruption, etc., etc. You have a lot on your plate. I wouldn't be so specific as to say that the government is coming up short, but they have challenges they need to deal with, and I think the best way going forward is engagement with these groups, transparency. And you can't never forget that the war on terror, comes at a cost, sadly sometimes.
That's why I asked you. So, what's your opinion about the human rights abuses in Nigeria, with your area as a conflict resolution expert?
Well, I have I haven't seen anything, myself. I haven't been around in detention centers or camps or like the Jiva camp or something like that. So I'm not going to give you I'm not going to give any statements on that.
Okay.
But what I would say is that first of all, I think there are certain organizations that act quietly and try to be a mediator between the public advocacy groups, and they do their job, like Amnesty International. They do their job, and they always will be there, and they are needed. and the government is needed equally there, and they need equal protection to fight the war against the insurgents. Now, in between there is space for private diplomacy, there is space for private mediation, and there are organizations, NGOs, etc., trusted state actors, non-state actors that have done that for decades that, could be possible for Nigeria to start engaging with and, get a dialogue going in a better understanding of why the advocacies. Groups like Amnesty or others, human rights sort of crisis group, God knows who they are, where they're coming from, and try and get, the government's message back to them in a more quiet, more discreet way that is probably much more efficient, for all parties. So, you have the advocacy groups, they want to know and document violations against, Your
paper at the conference you addressed in Nigeria was, you said, the practitioner's view on human rights abuses, right? So what recommendations do you have in your paper?
My recommendations, they're pretty simple. I think, that the government and the government agencies that are accused of these atrocities or, or wrongdoings or whatever it is, they need to be more transparent. They need to work closely with the advocacy groups in order to help them understand what work they're doing and why.
What if the advocacy groups, for instance, become mischievous? Mischief comes in here. It happens at times.
Yeah.
Some advocacy groups are sponsored from somewhere, just like you said.
Well, they're donor-based.
Boko Haram is funded from somewhere.
Yeah.
And when the Nigerian military was not covering good grounds, there were no reports from Amnesty International, for instance. But when they started covering good grounds using military attacks, Amnesty International started speaking. And a good number of Nigerians who knew that Nigeria was covering good grounds reacted. So now, what we mean is that, what if some of these advocacy groups have been identified by the Nigerian intelligence agencies to be mischievous? We should follow an arms and watch. The goal is the global village today.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Well, I have not seen that evidence. It's very hard to comment on. But in general, I would say that most of these big organizations or advocacy groups are held at quite high standard. Now, that doesn't mean that they always get it right, and that doesn't mean that you have to listen to them always. But in general, it gives you kind of a sense where the international community is swinging. So if Amnesty comes out in force against, like they did in Syria against al-Nusra, for example, so let's take something that I know a little bit of their work.
Okay.
I think they came out partly wrong, Amnesty International, on al-Nusra, on Jabhat al-Nusra in Syria. That doesn't say that the larger picture is that Jabhat al-Nusra is a problem for Syrian civilians and etc., and as a terrorist organization. Here in Nigeria, I don't want to comment because I don't know the situation very well. But I come back to my point from being a practitioner, as you said.
Yeah.
You should try and bridge the gap instead of seeing yourself on two opposite sides of the fence. Both of you are trying ultimately to protect civilians, and that's the middle ground. And you need to find a discreet way of starting that dialogue going so that you get productive instead, and you can get support and international recognition for your efforts that you are doing. And this comes back to another issue also. When the army dispatches soldiers to fight these insurgents, some of them don't come home to their families and loved ones, and that is equally a serious, as a serious problem as maybe the problems are in a Jiva camp, etc. So this is it's a double-edged sword.
Okay.
Everybody is suffering when you have insurgency. I think that's the conclusion from a meta perspective, if you want to say it like that.
Lately, the African Union, through the Peace and Security Commission, commended the efforts of the Nigerian government in the formation of the Joint Military Task Force made up of Nigeria, Niger, Chad, Benin Republic, and what have you. Also, the United Nations Secretary General at the 28th General Assembly of AU in Ethiopia commended what Nigeria was doing. And in the midst of this, advocacy groups comes in to say there are human rights abuses in Nigeria. Is that encouraging?
I don't think you can look at it as that digital. It's very seldom when you're fighting insurgency war that it's either or. It is usually there's a middle ground, and again that's where there's space for quiet talks to talk, to deal with a toxic situation. It's obviously very, very toxic, this stuff. So I haven't read the report from AU on this one. So I don't want to be specific on that.
Okay. Well, the program again is Diplomatic Ties, and we are looking at the state of human rights abuses and good governance in Nigeria. My guest is a Swedish based in Germany, a conflict resolution expert, David Falt. We'll be right back. I believe the paper you came to address in Nigeria is laying the path towards better human rights management in Nigeria, right?
Well, hopefully, yeah.
So how will that help?
Well, I try to be very pragmatic and and forward-looking. So my recommendations are very simple. Start reaching out to groups that you may not normally be talking to. If you don't want to do it yourself, find someone, a deniable envoy, an organization like the HD Center in Geneva, who I believe already has a couple of projects in Nigeria. There is Intermediate, a British NGO run by a distinguished gentleman called Powell, who is a former undersecretary under Jack Straw in the British.
What if their approach and models does not apply to Nigeria? Because it's about the model by British agency, for instance, may not apply to Nigeria.
But you
could bring a model that you cannot domesticate in Nigeria.
Well, first of all,
do you consider that?
No, I think that's fundamentally wrong.
Okay.
First of all, Intermediate in UK or the HD Center in Geneva or other organizations that try and help quietly with private diplomacy, functioning as a private diplomacy channel or vehicle, do not have a specific model they go in and apply.
Beautiful, yeah.
Everything is designed by engagement. So this is, a collaboration between understanding, what does the civil society need, what the advocacy groups are standing, what is the government, what are the aims, what are the goals, and what are the current issues, they're dealing with. And once that is understood, mediation effort starts. So, for example, private, talks can then maybe start between Amnesty, or it could, there might be ways to reach into the leadership or people around the leadership of Boko Haram to try and diffuse situations. And that's pretty much, what you're trying to do.
Because right now the concerns by Nigeria already is 3 years since the over 200 Chibok girls were abducted. And
it's pretty much 300 on the day.
The federal government says they're engaging with groups to ensure that the girls are brought back. So will some of these your recommendations work?
I mean, again, I don't want to be specific. I don't want to criticize or, and get involved in ongoing, negotiations or whatever is going. But I do believe firmly that, maybe a more direct approach can be successful in terms of, bringing hostages back from very, very dire situations, even after a long time. And we have seen examples in Syria and other places where hostages have been freed, after a significant amount of time have passed. So yeah, it's possible. Someone said to me that the average kidnapping time in Syria was about 24 months. This is obviously a very, very strange situation, where over 300 girls go missing. 200, sorry, went missing, in that, fashion. Who is to blame for that? Well, it's a little bit late to ask that. I think it's rather, how do you find a solution to that? I'm certainly in no position to tell, what the exact recipe for that is. That would take months of, mapping out, the dynamics of the whole group and exactly the circumstances. And I'm sure many, many much brighter people have tried to do that before me.
Okay. So what best model do you think Nigeria should adopt in engaging these advocacy groups that are really there to support Nigeria in the fight or to check human rights in Nigeria?
Well, I think you need to show that you're sincere in actually upholding law and order, comply with international frameworks of human rights. etc., etc. And one way of doing that seems to be what the army is now trying to do: have a hotline where you can report abusers, start engaging with these groups, bringing them in maybe to see exactly how the operations are carried out and what is the thinking behind the actual actions that they're taking. Open up for, maybe that's one thing that I put out in my paper, third-party human rights audits of specific detention facilities. So basically bring in human rights lawyers from outside, let them do an audit, and then show their findings in public, and have them discussed in some kind of reconciliation conference or something like that. But it can be done in many, many different ways. There are lots of tools available for countries with this kind of problems. There is usually funds accessible for serious projects that are aiming to resolve a problem, not just paintbrushing over the surface scratches. So I think in Nigeria needs to be sincere. I think maybe I mean, if I were the president here, which I'm obviously not, but I would probably start making moves in terms of shutting down mass detention centers, and try and deal with put up some kind of justice mechanism which can take people out of arbitrary or mass detention, and try and actually charge them with a crime or let them go. I'm not suggesting at all that the whole concept of what I do is to try and be as anonymous as possible. This is not about me and what I do. This is about the groups that are suffering, these civilians, etc., etc. So I mean, I'm sure you have never heard of the HD Center, for example, in Geneva. Well, that's very good, because what they do is trying to operate quietly, but be a key part to resolving disputes.
Okay, I'm happy that at least in an effort to ensure that insurgents are completely deflated in Nigeria, a lot of engagements are on. The developed clients are coming in to assist Nigeria, and that's one of the things you're doing. In as much as you say you want to remain anonymous, but I believe Nigerians are appreciative of what you have come to do, because sharing of the world today is a global village. Networking, collaborations, partnerships help a lot to resolve problems. So moving forward, if you're advised now, talk to Nigerians on how to go about this. Is it all about the military and the established organizations? Can Nigerians themselves be part of it? Somehow.
It's a very, very difficult question to answer. I would say, drawn from experience in other places, ordinary citizen should, report, illegal funding, or if someone in a village suddenly has a lot of money, arms or something like that, that is out of the usual. It's simple things like that, being vigilant and have your ears and eyes open to what's going on. Of course, also if you see people getting radicalized, so the ordinary citizen, of course, has to report this to authorities or to elderly leaders or whatever works in that community. That is how normal citizen works. The government, they have to do different things, and non-state actors have other things they should prioritize. But yeah, so
it's a collective thing. It's not just
this needs to be a very coordinated effort, and at the end of the day, you always have a win-win from this type of things. When violence go down, economic growth starts picking up again. As soon as areas are destabilized, like the Delta or whatever it is, oil fields, or it can be Libya or Kurdistan, when you have insurgence issues, you do not see any investments coming forward. In big international companies are scared of putting employees there, injecting money, etc.
So when all this is upturned, it will be the reverse now, right?
Well, hopefully you would see significant economic growth here in your country. I mean, you have a fantastic, resources in this country that could be, of course, explored further. But then, you would, as soon as you do that, you have the environmentalists coming around the block, when the Boko Harams are gone, and then that's the next problem we have.
As a last question to you before we shut down the program, I'll be asking you, from your own perspective, if whatever model you have come to, because you say we should not make it public to impact on us, we assimilate it, we apply it, it works. Do you think in a year's time we'll have it where calm? Talking about northeast, talking about southeast, talking about south-south. All the agitating groups have been calm and things will move on.
Sadly, I think the answer to that is no. If you say that the time frame is a year, but if you gave it...
I'm just projecting.
Yeah, but if you give it 3 to 5 years
Okay.
of serious engagement, I think you can significantly stabilize and maybe even eliminate some of, you know, the insurgents that is, you know, ongoing right now quite easily. But, you know, then comes back to the core thing. The government needs to show, you know, force, but also sincerity and determination when it comes to shutting down the financing of these illegal or, you know, terrorist activities and
What? Are all the hopes lost?
No, not at all. It's always hope. As long as you have helicopters that can take mediators into the hotspots and, you know, talks can go on, you know, there is hope.
So there's no need to have any fears. So your last word to Nigerians and your collaborating efforts, what will you say?
Well, you know, keep your hopes up, you know, stay, you know, keep writing letters to you know, as a constituent, you know, to your parliamentarians and your government, and, you know, ask them to engage, you know, seriously in this and, you know, keep working. But, you know, you are on a path that I think is, you know, heading in the right direction. You might need to tidy it up a little bit, you know, but, you know, that's no normal.
Okay. Mr. David Falt, it was nice talking with you.
Thank you very much.
I enjoyed your thoughts. I thought about 1 year, said no, it's a matter of 3 to 5 years we could get there. So I believe all the parties concerned, and he has also said that it's not all about government, it's a collective effort by all parties, Nigerians put together. You have a role to play. If you know where the illegal funding is coming from, inform the authorities and something could happen. So once again, thanks for being on my guest on the program.
Thank you very much.
We believe you enjoy your stay in Nigeria.
Thank you very much.
On behalf of all of us here, thanks for watching and be our guest same time next time on the station. Bye-bye.